In 1985, organization I had been with had been doing Christian communications consulting and training for several years. All of it outside North America. It was Asia, Africa, Latin America. And in 1985, we were asking ourselves, if we had 10 years and we could take the assets which we have, and every YWAM base, every YWAM person ought to be asking the same question, not because it was a special question, it's a generic question, but we ask ourselves, if we had 10 years, excuse me, and we could take the assets which God has given us, how could we most effectively deploy or use those assets over the next 10 years to see the greatest return on the kingdom, for the kingdom? And that's the question that Jesus asked, the master asked the three stewards. One got 10, one got 5, one got 2, one got 1, depending on the story you read. They had different assets. God does not equip us all the same, but he does expect the same level of commitment to performance on the part of everyone, seeking maximum return on investment. And that was the problem with the guy who had 1. Thank you so much. Jesus tells this story because when the steward came back and he checked up on these servants, 2 had done exactly what he expected. They had taken the money, they had put the money to work, and had seen return on investment. The third person played it safe. Actually played it very stupidly, put the money in the ground, as you know, and came back and, look, I have preserved your money for you, here's the one you gave me. And he said, you lazy servant, the least you could have done, every day you walked by the money changers, every day you walked by the bank. See, even in those days, there were banks. People loaned money, people gave interest on money. My earliest days, I was actually in Kabul, Afghanistan with Lauren Cunningham at the Dilaram House in the 1970s. In the when the king was still on the throne in Afghanistan. This is before the revolution, before the communists came in, before any of that stuff, long before the Taliban, before any of this kind of stuff. And you could walk through in those days, Kabul was actually a beautiful city. River ran through the city, beautiful trees, fabulous mountains, a lot like Tehran, the beautiful snow-capped mountains up behind. Very traditional market. There was Intercontinental Hotel there. I mean, they actually had regular airline service. Everything worked. The country had a very wide-ranging, highly developed system of agricultural irrigation that had been developed over nearly 2,000 years. By the way, one of the things that the Russians did, seeking to intimidate the Afghans when the Russians were there, was not just to plant mines, landmines, which they did. When the Russians left, there were more landmines in the ground in Afghanistan. There were 2.5 landmines in the ground in Afghanistan for every living Afghan in the world. That's not only the Afghans that are in the country, that's all the diaspora Afghans. So when you would go to the refugee camps during the terrible war with the Soviets, you had 3 million in northern Pakistan, in the Northwest Frontier Province, and about 1.5 million down in the southern, farther down along the Paki border, and you had 2 million in Iran. And you go into these refugee camps and, hundreds, thousands of people with arms blown off, children with legs missing. Mines, it was just intimidation, had absolutely no strategic value whatsoever. But the other thing which they did to intimidate the people was to destroy the irrigation systems. And And it had taken them nearly 2,000 years to develop this irrigation system. It was all a very simple gravity feed irrigation system. Afghanistan was actually a net exporter of agricultural products when the king was deposed. The country was actually reasonably stable and, economically predictable. Well, those days you could walk through the bazaar, the souk, the market, and there was a section from here to the end of the elementary school is nothing but banks, and they're all sitting at tables. Money changers and banks. They would exchange any currency in the world. Dirt streets, they would exchange any currency in the world. And they were very good. So when the steward said, "You terrible servant, you walked every day while I was gone, you walked by the banks, the least you could have done, give it to the bank, I get the money back with interest. You didn't do that." So in 85, we're asking, we have these assets, what should we do? And we didn't have money, and we didn't have a big campus, we didn't have hardware, we didn't have a lot of material things, but we had this huge network of relationships around the world. We had some experience and so forth. We prayed and thought, we said, we really think the number one issue, as I said to you this morning, number one issue is the fact that God's people, good people, doing good things, are not talking to each other. I have one favorite saying, it's not rocket science. It's so simple. On the surface, it's so simple. Good people doing good things, but nobody talking to each other. This is the problem. Now, how do we solve this problem? And we went out and raised a little bit of money. And as Seth, as I mentioned this morning, oops, it's gone. By June of 86, then we had gone from Hong Kong in Asia all the way to West Africa, talking to people with whom we had done communication, consulting, and training for the last 6, 8, 10 years. And the people in North Africa, because we had been doing training in radio, video production and other things since 1974, and we were basically going everywhere and saying, very simple idea, good people here doing good things. Do you think there would be any value if we really are serious about seeing large numbers of people come into the kingdom and the church growing and healthy? Would there be any value sitting down one time to explore a very simple question? One simple question. If we want to see that kind of outcome, more people coming to Christ, break through the church, is there anything we might do better together than if we continue to work separately? It's a very simple question. Answering the question is not always so easy. Well, interesting, we talked to all these people across the world, and the first people who kind of saluted, when we raised the question, were the guys in North Africa. And Seth knows, to this day, I don't understand. Nobody would have picked North Africa. Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Mauritania. It was not a popular part of the world, for missions. It was not a lot of high visibility. It was not, in journalism we call it front page index. Means how often does that part of the world or that topic come up on the front page? There was no front page index. It was, it hardly ever appeared at all. So we didn't choose North Africa because it was strategic. And we talked with all kinds of ministries there. And in the end, as Seth knows, eventually 16 people came into an old hotel across from the Bull Ring in Malaga, Spain. And these guys from Malaga know this area. The hotel is still there. I was by it last October, called the Maestranza. And of course they've upgraded it and so forth, but it was pretty ratty in those days. And they came into the room. We had Pentecostals. We had actual anti-Pentecostals. People who had a historic position, we don't allow Pentecostals in our mission. We had New Zealanders and Dutchmen and Brits and Americans and so forth. Very diverse group of people. Representing YWAM. YWAM was there. Gary Tissing was there. He later played a very significant role in that whole initiative, subsequently became a very close friend. We had Transworld Radio there, Wycliffe Bible Translators, Campus Crusade for Christ, Gospel Missionary Union, Arab War Ministries, and it went on and on and on. They were all there, and they spent 3.5 days, 3 nights and fourth part of the fourth day, trying to answer this one question. 60 million people in 3 countries, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. Those were the main countries they were focused on. Libya was Muammar Gaddafi, very difficult. Mauritania was kind of off the chart, in those days. Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. 60 million people in these countries. In all of these countries combined, nobody was sure, but maybe 2,000 to 3,000 Christians out of 60 million. They asked themselves 3 or 4 basic questions when we were discussing the possibility of this meeting. Either the gospel of Christ is totally bogus. We are totally deceived. Because people have been preaching the gospel, going back to colonial times, have been preaching the gospel for over 100 years. You remember North Africa was like Turkey, like Central Asia. North Africa was Christian before it was Arab Muslim. Then it reverted, darkness, and then Islam came up, overran North Africa with a sword, conquered. Either the gospel has been preached now for over 100 years, either the gospel is completely bankrupt. Now, if that's true, we're facing some pretty serious consequences. Our methodology is completely wrong. God is extremely selective. There's a lot more to Calvinism than we think. Or there's something happening here spiritually that we don't even understand. And we have not understood it for 100 years. But clearly, our assumption is the gospel is the power of God unto salvation for all that believe. The epistles say to us, God is not willing that any should perish. God's desire is that all men, all women come to know him. So what's wrong with this picture? See, as Christians, we really, really, really have to come to grips with these issues. You cannot dodge these issues. Basically, we think something is fundamentally wrong here, and we are willing to at least one time ask, is there anything we could do better together than if we continue to work separate? So they came into the room. We spent 3.5 days, and Seth knows we had flip charts, and we had stuff pasted on the walls. We worked in small groups, came back, plenary sessions, feeding back, all these ideas. By Friday morning, they had come up with a list of about 20 items. 20 items could only be done by working together. They were important things that they felt if we wanted to see tens of thousands. See, can you even think the idea where 100 years and only 2,000 or 3,000 believers out of 60 million, can you even say the word? Are you willing to even dare speak the word? Hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands coming into the kingdom. Can you even imagine such a thing? Well, if that is our hope, what has to happen? What do we know? I mean, God may show us other things we don't know, but the things we do know, what has to happen? What are the roadblocks? And so they identified 20 things. Now, the problem is, when Toyota decides to build cars, when they began, or Honda began to build cars, Honda did not build 20 different models. They started with one model, very, very simple car. Toyota started with one very simple car. They learned how to make a car, and they learned how to make a car better and better. And then they decided, well, maybe we need a little different car. So now they make two kinds of cars. Well, these people had never done anything together. They had never done one thing together. You can't do 20 things. So now you have the huge challenge. Say, we have somehow got to get this list from 20 down to a realistic number. Because as the facilitators, and Seth will remember the discussions we were having at night and behind the scenes, we knew that if they decided, think of your IWT, think of Metro Manila, think of Seoul, Korea, think of Malaga, you get the people together. So the very fact that you call a meeting raises expectations. There's no point in coming to the meeting unless they think that something is going to happen. They may be very resistant in coming to the meeting, but by simply having the meeting, you raise people's expectations. And they're coming there saying, well, I knew it wouldn't work, or I knew this was just somebody's private agenda, or we knew that if the group decided they were going to do something, they had to see some success fairly quickly. They did not have to see 100,000 people come into the kingdom in the next 12 months, but they had to see some very, very specific things happen because they had come together, because otherwise it's just cheap talk. Who needs more talk? It's the same old business. People come together, talk, go away, nothing ever happens. So we knew there was absolutely no hope of doing 20 things. Let's get it down to 2 things, 3 things. We spent the next 6 hours praying, talking, small groups, praying, voting. It's like, do you remember the disciples when they chose the new disciple? They prayed and then they drew straws. What is this? That kind of gambling, But we'd have prayer, then we'd vote. And we kept getting the list down. Finally, it was, if we could do one thing that have the greatest impact on these 60 million people, the likelihood of 60 million people hearing the good news effectively in the next 12 months, what one thing, forget everything else right now. We can keep the list over here, but put one thing, what is it going to be? And they finally agreed. And I'll tell more about what that was and the next steps that happened. But I don't know if you remember, Seth, but I remember it was about 3 or 4 in the afternoon on Friday, they all stood up and spontaneously sang, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow." It was the most extraordinary thing. And then God, in His grace, did allow that one thing to actually happen. And it had a very big impact, and I'll tell the story tomorrow about how that happened and what the elements were. The rest of the story. It's a continuing story. Now I want to ask you, in this story, what comes out of the story that seems for you to be relevant to an IWT? If you're going to be facilitating, if you're going to be giving vision, trying to encourage people, what do you hear? Anything come to your mind? Yes.
I guess that you don't have to save the whole world just right in a blink, but because I think sometimes, because you was mentioning that when you set up a meeting, they already have expectations, and then probably while you're processing, people start to have like all these new ideas and things that you would want to do, but then trying to like not kill off their enthusiasm and yet still keep them down to like one realistic thing and actually have that happen. I think is very important that it's not like you have to do like all the 5, 10, 15, 20 things all at once, but it's like taking step by step.
Any other observations about this story?
All right. What I'm hearing you say, taking this in the context of an IWT, would be going to a group of people, hearing what they would like to do, taking that and using IWT to reach it through their context. And in a sense, is that you need to, you have your model coming, you have in mind what you want to do, but you are not going to enforce it in them. But you want to hear their view and take what you have and what they would like to see take place and merge them together and produce results from that.
Thank you. It's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge to acknowledge that God may have placed a vision on your heart, but your own understanding of how the vision will work out may not be the complete answer. And that as other people are inspired, as the Holy Spirit speaks to other people, they bring complementary elements that are critical and necessary to your IWT. And they, in fact, may know situations, circumstances, realities at the local level that are very important, very strategic, but you may not have considered your initial primary concerns. But as long as they're relevant to your long-term goals, they may be absolutely right on target. Frank?
Just listening to that, I'm also wondering if we're overwhelming local churches with Impact World Tour. If you're saying, break it down, take it down to 2 things they can actually accomplish, because we come in, we create almost a moment of crisis for them, which I think is good, but we're hitting them in so many different levels all at the same time. You have to, discipleship and young people and different people going to church and having evangelism outside the church that doesn't look like evangelism that they know. Well, we're really, we're hitting them with lots of different things all at the same time. How could we be more strategic in a way to not overwhelm them, but without taking too much away from what we do or what we think is right to do?
That's a very interesting point. And as I have read through the handbook, the IWT handbook, as it has been in the past. I read through, the schedule that you have there. And it, in some respects, IWT comes in prescriptively. In a sense, there's a sense in which IWT comes in with a kind of design for the process. That's very important because you have an idea of what works. But I think it'll be interesting over the next 4 days to interact and discuss how can we be flexible. Take one more comment. Brother, are you going to?
Yeah, from what I'm hearing from your story, it's also this part of exercising to listen to people and listen to them and allow them to discover what they can possibly do if they work together that will be impossible to do if they work individually. So, and I think also the IWT also comes in that part where we present what is possible that we can achieve when we work together, but it can be impossible if it's just one dominating a church or individual that is doing it.
What you really are hoping to do is not tell people what to do, but fire their imagination as to what they can do working together and with some help at facilitation. I want to add one other footnote to this story and then move on. One observation about when they came to Friday afternoon and they made the choice, having been worked, they got 10 down to 12, 12 down to 9, 9 down to 4, 4 down to 3, 3 down to 1. Now that is very, very tough because everything on the list of 20 was important. You think we can't delay. We've got to do number 4, we've got to do number 14 or number 7. It's critical. But you can't do everything. Remember, friends, now you're talking to somebody who's given the last 25, 30 years of his life to helping people define specific objectives, trying to achieve breakthroughs. But I have to remind myself In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said, I have finished the work you sent me to do. Now, in a sense, this is really shocking. Within 5 kilometers of where Jesus was praying this prayer and said this, women were being raped, widows were being ripped off economically, judges were being oppressive in their judgments, there was an occupying army that was ruthless, the political system was bankrupt, and the religious system was totally vacuous. And within 1 hour, his disciples were all going to flee. Now, talk about reality check. The Old Testament Isaiah said Jesus, he came with his face set like a flint, that is like a stone, like a rock, for the cross. That's why he came into the world, to live and die, the Son of God, the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. That's the center tree. And to recruit and to provide on-the-job training for these 12 guys. It was very messy, very, very messy process. And humanly speaking, you have to say that when he left, it appeared to be very unstable. The predictability of success was quite suspicious. But he knew exactly where he was going, what he was doing. And all I'm saying is in IWT, many times I think the most important thing we do is give the people the vision, give them the general framework, facilitate, help them teach, learn, discover. That's what the disciples were doing. They were learning and discovering. Their eyes were open to the reality. Now, the one observation I want to make about that story is this. The one thing they chose was the big objective, still in their minds, by the end of 3.5 days, was 60 million people. In the next, we don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, certainly not 100 years. We're impatient. We're fed up. We want to see change. We want to see Jesus break through in the lives of North Africans. We want to see tens of thousands of people come into the kingdom. That is the vision. But in the meantime, the first step is going to be this thing we're going to do, and we're going to do it in the next 12 months. Now, the thing they decided to do had to meet 2 very specific specifications. And as you come out in your IWT and you get people together in a city, the objectives that you set together with them, you don't set the objective for them, you set the objectives with them. The objectives, and we'll talk about this in much more detail over the next 3 days, the objectives had to meet that afternoon, Friday afternoon, had to meet 2 very key qualities, had to have 2 key qualities. First of all, everyone in the room, everyone, knew that this objective was something God wanted done. This was not a private agenda. It was not some organization or some leader who had a little pet project. No. It was very clear. If they could do this, this was clearly something that God wanted done. Second, every leader, every person in the room had to be able to say, if we accomplish this objective, I can see how our mission, our vision, will be more fully realized. Now, that is always, I cannot say it often enough, always the test. You get a church, you get a street kids ministry, you get work for the homeless, you get whoever it is you get in your IWT, in your city. Together you pray, talk, develop consensus around the vision. You have the big vision. As you set the specific objectives, they must always meet these 2 criteria. Always. This is a God thing. I know it. Walk out of here. I can tell people that I meet who are not at these meetings, I can tell them. this is really, I think this is a God thing. And I can go back to my own colleagues, to my own ministry people and say, here is the objective, and here is how that's going to help us. It may not help us next month. It may not help us in 3 months, but I can see there's a connection between collectively accomplishing this and what we're about. And I will demonstrate that the following. The decision they made was that at that time there were 8 different groups making radio programs in Arabic and Berber languages for North Africa. There were 3 different Bible correspondence course schools sending stuff in for Muslims to do. Their OM, Operation Mobilization, and YWAM were sending into North Africa what we called suicide squads. You know, they were supposed to go in for 2 weeks. They come in with all this literature. They get in there and they pass out thousands of pieces of literature. You know, and kids are running around the streets. The stuff is fluttering in the air. You know, and 3 days later, the police arrest these people and throw them out of the country. But in the meantime, you know, 50,000 pieces of literature have been passed out. And you had a lot of people making contact with the radio programs and many national believers doing follow-up. But different national believers were following up for each different radio ministry. And some people were writing, the same man in a small village in the mountains of Morocco was writing to 3 different radio programs. So, the secret police are sitting across the street, having a cigarette and drinking their coffee. The French taught them very well. And they wouldn't see a foreigner, but they see another Moroccan. And they look at this guy and say, who is this guy? He's a stranger. What is he doing here? Why is he knocking on this door? And 2 days later, the guy who lives in the house is in jail. When we were having the meeting in Malaga, Spain, in the Maestranza Hotel, there were 8 men in jail in Morocco at that time because of a lack of coordination of follow-up among believers. There were hundreds and hundreds of Muslims making inquiry every single month about Jesus. But it was all being dissipated. It was like into the sand. They said, right now we have this huge harvest. People are showing interest in the gospel, interest in Jesus. And we're just totally blowing this. If we could somehow get our act together and coordinate this work, we could see right there, we could see probably hundreds, maybe thousands of people every year coming into the kingdom. This is the number one problem. Now, and we got to solve this problem. It's a big, very big, complicated problem. 8 radio ministries, 3 Bible correspondence course ministries, broadcasting groups, literature groups, visiting team groups, a lot of history, a lot of agendas, you know, a lot of budgets, a lot of stuff going on, you know, from France and from Spain and from Britain and how in the world. There was one guy in the room, a Brit by the name of Brian Bull. He was a Wycliffe Bible translator. He was working on a Moroccan colloquial Arabic translation of the New Testament. Because, you know, Arabic, like a lot of languages, has different kind of regional qualities. And Moroccan colloquial Arabic is quite different from, say, standard literary Arabic, and they were doing this translation. He was a very quiet guy, kind of typical Wycliffe guy, you know, sitting in the back of the room. And his translation, you know, he's sitting down in Algeciras working on this translation. You didn't see the guy for 3 months, 6 months, you know. He was working away with his informants. When the meeting was finished, and we were about, just I think before they sang Praise God from Whom All Blessings Flow, Brian Bull spoke up, very quiet, you know, typical PhD linguistics guy. He says, you may wonder why I'm interested in this. You know, I have absolutely nothing to do day to day with follow-up of Muslims. I'm working on this translation. I've been here for 3.5 days, participated in all of this. He said, I want to tell you, if this problem is not solved, 5 years from now, when I'm finished with my translation, there will be no market for the New Testament. I will be back to the future meetings. And he came back to every single meeting in the future. This was a guy who could see long way. He could see this was a God thing. He could see that 5 years from now, the decision they made that afternoon had critical importance to his own vision and what God had called him to do. And 3 years ago, can you imagine? This is 2004. I went to Malta to this annual meeting where all the North Africa Partnership people meet, 450 people. I mentioned it earlier today. I walked in the room and I thought, because all this has come from that very beginning, 16 guys, now 450 people meeting, 12, 15 partnerships across North Africa, all this stuff going on. And tomorrow we'll talk about, or Wednesday we'll talk about some amazing places. There's one language group in North Africa where in the last 10 years, over 100,000 people, Muslims, have been swept into the kingdom. It's the largest harvest of people, Muslims, anywhere in the world. It took 10 years for God to work through the people and provide the context, and now the dream of 1986 is beginning to come true. When I walked in the room in 2004, the back of the hotel room, I said to myself, I wonder if there will be anyone here who was at that very first meeting. Will I recognize any of these old guys? You know? And I walked in the room, and the very first person I laid eyes on, I could not believe it. Brian Bull, the Wycliffe Bible translator. See, Jesus never once said, "Well done, thou good and successful servant." He said, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." Okay, more on that later. Here, just to give you an idea, this is, again, you can download this. Some of these diagrams are in the book, different ways. There are different ways to look at the city. Cities are complicated places. You know, there may be youth and students, the youth culture in a city. There may be the poor and the social fringe. Maybe business leadership, the business community, maybe ethnic communities. You can slice and dice the community, you know, many different ways. There are different people who have impact on the community. Churches, individuals doing personal witness, internet. You, I'm sure, are aware of this. One of the networks that we have helped develop in the last 4 years is a thing called ISSA, I-S-S-A, which is Arabic for Jesus, but it is the Arabic Internet Evangelism Network. There are people using the internet for evangelism among Muslims. At our last meeting held in Helsinki, Finland, we've been going now 3 years, we had 85 people at the meeting representing over 50 different ministries. 65 of the 85 people in the room were Arab nationals. Of the 65, 55 were Muslim background believers. Today, in the last 24 hours, in the next 24 hours, there will be more Muslims making inquiry about Jesus via the internet than through all face-to-face church planting in the world combined. Nothing even comes close to it. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims are making inquiry about Jesus every single day on the internet. There are chat rooms, I could show you, I'll put them up here. Arabic language chat rooms. There are at least 4 or 5 of them that run 24/7. 24/7. These are evangelistic chat rooms where at any given time, 24/7, 200 to 2,000 people. So the internet in Malaga, the internet in Metro Manila, the internet maybe, you know, we don't think of it, but it's special events. You're going to have the big thing, you know, we have the power team and you have this and the island deal, all this stuff, and it's concentrated in a week or 10 days or whatever it is. Mass media, radio and television, what part does that play? Prayer, which is the base for everything. How do these things intersect? Now, it's IWT that can be the facilitation that helps these people intersect. Because I can tell you right now in Metro Manila, just like in Seattle or my middle town of Edmonds, these people are not talking to each other. Everybody's busy about doing their own thing. Another way we can look at IWT and try to think, how do we unpack the city? Big, complicated place. Where do we start? This piece, and then this piece, and then this piece. Again, we have churches, mass media communication, prayer, local ministries, money. So this is a whole list of possible kingdom resources. It may be 2-3 times. This is just a kind of suggestion. Now, what we're trying to do is to get the churches and the media and prayer and local ministries and personal witness, money, working together to reach and transform a city. The problem is, the city is a big, complicated place. There's not, one easy fix. There's not one silver bullet. There's not one magic formula. Somehow in our IWT, we have to have multiple strategies which express the diversity of the kingdom of God and respond to the diversity of needs in the community. So you may call them I put here task forces. They may be committees, they may be working groups dealing with various issues. And they have very, very specific objectives. Now, it's, this whole thing together that makes up IWT. And, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these kind of diagrams because the diagrams are always, they're incomplete. You can't possibly do it all. And a successful IWT is not an event. We talked about that earlier today. It's a process. There's a preparation phase. Identify the influential people in the community and build relationships with them. Develop consensus. Consensus about what? About vision. What do we hope that God will do in this city? And then very specific objectives. What do we hope will happen among 60 million people in North Africa? Well, we hope that in time, hundreds of thousands will come into the kingdom. That's why we're sitting down to talk and pray. But in the meantime, we have to set specific, tangible, practical objectives. So our IWT teams and our leadership and facilitation have to develop consensus, build vision objectives. We eventually have to have a steering committee. We have to agree on an action plan. What are the key elements that they're very clear to everyone? Other key committees in place, maybe finance committee or other kinds of committees. We have these church engagement, kickoffs, these CKOs. I don't know if it's IWT phrase. But it's important to get churches engaged, transform seminar, prayer, banquets, all of these things going on. Impact Sundays, Operation Andrew, get those people in place. And then you have the campaign, the big events. And then there's follow-up and discipleship. And it may be church planting underway. And it may be things like community centers. The transformation goals are agreed on. What's the long-term vision here? And eventually the church, the local church, meaning God's people in the community, have got to own this vision. They've got to go on with it. So we see very clearly that IWT is not an event. It is not the campaign. The campaign is a key piece, but it's just one piece. This is the whole process. Now, we said this morning that during these 3 days we're going to look at 2 or 3 things. One, what are the qualities that effective IWTs have? Second, what kinds of outcomes and so forth, what has to go on to make those things happen? And what skills do I need to have as an IWT person? Okay, unpacking. Let's unpack this process. Now I'm going to put the list back up there. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes just to turn to the person next to you. I want you to ask 2 questions. Looking at this action list, this process, which I'm going to put back up here, I want you to think about these two questions. What 2 to 3 partnership skills seem to you to be most important? What would I need to be able to do? And why will those skills be important? What do I need to know or be able to do? And why is that so important? Does that make sense? Those are 2 very simple questions. What do I need to be able to do? And why is it important? Okay, now I want to go back here. You look at this list. What partnership skills do I need to have to do this? Or what does our team need to have in the way of skills, partnership skills? And why are those skills important? I'll give you 5 minutes to discuss among yourselves. We'll take a little bit of feedback. Where's the microphone now? We're just going to go very quickly. I just want to take 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. What skill do we need? It's that, which mic are we?
We have 2 actually. We have
Okay.
2 mics. I would say one of the things that we realize is it's communication and just basic relationship, but ongoing communication, clear communication, is a skill that's necessary, imperative to be able to bring people together.
Okay. What other skills do we need?
All right, we took the first 2 in terms of identifying influential people. The key there being that somebody's following somebody, and you need to get the people that are being followed and impact them with the vision and the objectiveness of your vision, and in that way you can sell it in them and through them.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, I find the skills that is important in the context I am in is in the area of relationship on the top, on a national, regional, city, and community. Why is it important? Because everything begins there. I have a pastor who said, if you're just a facilitator, forget about that. I will not support that. But if you are in it, I support you. I even have a chairman. Because of relationship, you pull them to a meeting without any knowledge of anything. They just are there because of relationship. So
Because they believe in you.
they believe in you. Yeah.
Sure. Other skills.
Okay. What I think about is that the church engagement and the church ongoing vision, because in the situation of the Korea, the church is a very big portion in Christianity, because so we need to respect that kind of system and we need to work with that church system in Korea. So we think about the church ongoing vision and the church engagement is very important
And
for
the
us.
skills to do that. The skills needed to do that. How we do that. I mean, I'm not asking what the skills are, but I'm just saying to be able to have the skills, to appreciate that, and to have the skills to build the relationship with the churches. Okay, 1 or 2 more. Diplomatic skills.
And just being able to and just being able to let them know to take ownership of the event themselves, because I heard a pastor say one time, I love the fact that you give us everything and we just implement what we have in our strategies into that curriculum. So we give them a vehicle, but it's their ownership of the city. You know, they're going to be the ones that are here after we leave the city.
Okay, skills that help us empower other people. Okay, just a final note on this. Seth, before you put that down, Seth reminded me something about that meeting in Malaga, Spain that I had kind of forgotten about. Would you just mention what you were saying? Because you were there and it was a different perspective.
I'd always figured God's people worked together, so I couldn't figure out why they needed a meeting. But as we got into this meeting, Phil would know, of the 18 people or something were there, they had really not had anything formal. They were all working in North Africa amongst the Berber people, but they hadn't really talked to each other. So it was interesting what Phil did. He asked them all, why don't we just go around, you tell us what you do. So the guy from, Transworld Radio said they do this, and then they also do that, and they also do this. And the guy from one of the
Frontiers or YWAM.
one of them said, well, we do this and we do follow-up work. And the other guy over there said, you guys do follow-up work? We didn't know you do follow-up work. Maybe, we're really weak there. Maybe you can do that. And then the other guy said, well, we do this and this. And somebody else said, hey, I never knew you guys did that. And so there were all these people who knew of the organizations, but they really didn't know what the people were doing. And to me, that was like, this is just not rocket science. It was just so simple. And what was good was they were coming up and saying, hey, maybe you can help. It wasn't us saying, hey, you need to talk to that person, and you need to work together, because when it comes from within the people themselves, it seems to be just so much more ownership.
And when we start talking about the process and detail and skills you need and so forth in your IWTs, I'll tell you some really stories about this kind of stuff that you cannot believe. Good people, just lack of communication and the consequences of that. Here are the qualities. We said, why do all airplanes fly? 777s and two-seater trainers fly for the same reason. All IWT initiatives succeed because of these qualities. Great vision and specific intermediate objectives. We will unpack over the next few days every one of these things in much more detail. They're built on relationships of trust. Now, weakness in any one of these things can either cripple the IWT, make it less effective, or has the potential of destroying the initiative. The IWT initiative must be seen as a process, not an event. It is not the campaign. If we see 7,000 people come to Jesus in Malaga, is the job finished in Malaga? Please. What is the population of Malaga? 600,000? Everything is foundation of prayer. Listen, friends, and I'll tell some stories about how prayer transforms partnership, but this is not a game of guns and money. We are locked in hand-to-hand combat with cosmic forces of darkness. And just because we can get, in a car or walk down to Kona City and have a coffee and have an ice cream and things look very normal, it's very easy. Satan allows us, he works actively to disguise the struggle that's going on. In the West, we have minimized satanic evil and darkness for so long. Now, I go to Africa, or I go to certain parts of Asia, I go to certain parts of India, Central Asia, go to traditional cultures, people go to Haiti, people understand evil. People understand darkness. In the West, people don't even believe in darkness. Prayer is critical. I mean, working in a modern day, sure, in Spain, is there a lot of witchcraft? Is there a lot of occultism? Of course there is. The same thing is true in Hawaii. It may be just a matter of degrees. But modern Spain, compared to Spain 100 years ago or 200 years ago, it's very contemporary, a kind of nouveau view of the world. And even the church gets affected by this. We really don't believe that everything that happens in IWT of any lasting value is based in prayer. Diligent, consistent facilitation of the initiative, of the partnership, coaching of the people who are doing the work, and encouragement. They need encouragement. You can't just wind up the clock on some committee and walk away. Every partner in the IWT initiative has to have a clear, defined role. What are they going to be doing? What's their part? And in the ideal situation, it's not always possible, it's not always true, but the best partners are partners that have inside the partner agency somebody who is a champion for IWT. They believe in it, they're selling the vision back into their own ministry. Because if you don't have someone communicating what God is doing, what the vision of this is back to their own team, it's very difficult. The ability for the IWT to acknowledge diversity while you focus on the common purpose and unity that God has given you, but to constantly acknowledge the diversity, that's the tremendous beauty of the body of Christ. Conscious celebration of success. That is Boeing, having 8,000, 10,000 people standing around, breaking champagne and shouting and singing songs when they roll out the 787. These are ordinary people that need to be encouraged because they've invested their lives. A long-term commitment to the city by the churches, because IWT comes in for a season, but the leadership, the kingdom leadership, the church leadership and so forth in the community, they're going to continue to be there. Do they have an ownership? Do they have a sense of commitment to the long-term spiritual transformation of the city? IWT is to be responsible spiritually. We cannot leave until we have done everything in our power. We cannot disengage until we have done everything in our power to facilitate the churches taking ownership of the long-term spiritual health of the community. In a very real sense, we will have failed, because even if we see 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 people come into the kingdom, back in the back of our minds, we know the population of the city is 500,000 or 600,000. And if we don't equip them to go on, and we understand that partnerships don't come free, so we plan on problems and we prepare for them. Now, all successful IWT partnerships have these qualities. There is no variation. The local circumstances may change. That process that I talked about, starting with identifying the influentials and building relationships that may change a bit, because each IWT is a bit different. But these qualities always have to be present. Now, very quickly, because we're not going to go until 8 o'clock. Trying to look at the clock. Excuse me. I'm not sure I would last till 8 o'clock, and I'm sure some of you will not last till 8 o'clock. So, here are as I have looked at the IWT process and been praying about this and looking at the timeline and all these things, reading the handbook and talking to Mark and, with Becky and so forth over the last few months. These are some of the skills that I think are going to be essential, and we're going to be talking about these over the next few days. You first of all have to know your city. Before you ever go out and start talking to pastors, ever start going out talking to Christian government leaders or Christian business leaders, Christian ministry leaders, you need to be as an expert on the city already as you can humanly be. Last year, I was asked to come to speak to a large Presbyterian church at their Global Mission Conference, a very evangelical church, big missions budget. It's in a very wealthy area of the state of Florida. More Ferraris, more Bentleys per square mile there than anywhere, even more than Beverly Hills. First Presbyterian Church of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, before I went down there, I started doing online research. I think the total amount of time I spent was maybe 6 hours. I looked at the demographics. What is the makeup of the population in the county? Economic makeup. What is the ethnic makeup? How many immigrants have come into the county in the last 5 years? How many people does the government say are living at or below the poverty line? I started reading articles from the local newspapers online about economic, social conditions, problems in the county. One of the things which I found out was that in the county is called Broward County, B-R-O-W-A-R-D, Broward County. I found out that in Broward County there were over 26,000 single parents, the majority of whom were women. There were over 50,000 children in public schools in Broward County living below the poverty line. This is a very rich city, and if you were to look at it superficially, you would think, you know, it's very upmarket. The vast majority of these single parents were women who were struggling to work, keep their kids alive, keep their families together. I mean, really, really tough stuff. So when I sat down with this church, I said, you know, after we did some introductory things, one night we were doing this kind of overview. We're talking about partnership and collaboration. That's why they wanted me to be there. I said, now, you are the local people. You know your own situation. But I just want to tell you, I spent a little bit of time looking at the city of Fort Lauderdale and at Broward County. Now, I'm going to put up a few things, and I had put all this stuff in the PowerPoint, you know. And 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I went through this stuff. The people in the room sat in stunned silence. Not one single person in the room knew that there were 26,000 single parents, 50,000 kids living under the poverty line. Not one person. Now, I can tell you right now, 90% of the pastors, evangelical churches in Metro Manila really don't know what's going on in Metro Manila. They have a perception. They have an idea. They have some perception of their own area. They may be talking to a few people, but they don't have the big picture. Not because they're stupid. It's not because they're indifferent. They're busy. Life goes on. They have to do different things. Well, this was a shock to these people. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I come in as a foreigner, a stranger, present this information. We're talking about partnership. When I present this information about their own area, what does that say to them about me? I'm sorry? I care. I'm what? Interested in them. You know what you're talking about. That's why I say, before you ever make a single call on a pastor, you better know your city. And these days, one of the wonderful things, by God's grace, one of the great things about Google and all these other things, you know, we can know. I can sit in Seattle, Washington, and I can do a pretty good profile. It doesn't have the human element, it doesn't smell, it doesn't taste, it doesn't have the feel, but the objective, statistical, sociological, demographic facts of Metro Manila, I can do a pretty good profile in Metro Manila. And I could get 100 pastors in the room, and I could go through this profile, and most of them would be surprised. Not because they're stupid, but because that's not what they're doing every day. Okay, know the city, identify the influentials, and build relationships with those people. Do a whole section just on how there's a whole section in this book, I'm going to have you read that tomorrow night on actually going out and talking to people. What it is you say, how you listen, the questions you ask, and so forth. Build vision and prayer. Without vision, the people perish. Without prayer, it's disaster. You have to facilitate. Maybe not everybody in the IWT team, but the team itself must facilitate meetings. Meetings are ultimately critical. You have to eventually get people into rooms, talking to each other, working together, defining, building leadership and the committees. You have to develop a common data set. Now, what in the world is a common data set? If we want to reach Seoul, Korea, and we have 100 churches in the room, these churches must have at least an approximate agreement on what the conditions in Metro Seoul are. They have to have a common understanding. They don't have to have everything exactly the same. They don't have to know everything. But their general understanding of what the situation is in the city has to be in agreement. And how do you get that? Part of the process, and we'll go through this over the next 2 days, in the way you put these meetings together, the kind of information that must come out in these meetings is helping them build this common basis or common set of information. Because as you go on, everything you do after that is based on these assumptions. If you start with the wrong assumptions or inaccurate information, inaccurate perceptions, that's exactly where you will wind up, off target. We have then to define success. What do we agree on? What's the big vision? That's what God's called us to. What are we going to do in the next 6 months, 3 months, 12 months? Specific objectives. We have to be able to celebrate success. You know, in the case of this North Africa partnership, by God's grace, within 12 months, they actually accomplished this vision. Very complicated vision. But it was one step toward a very, very long journey. But they were able to gather these 15, 16 people to celebrate that God actually helped them do it. And so they're willing to come back to another objective. If you fail at the very first thing you tried to do, why should people come back to the meeting? Why should they be part of the partnership? People have got to see some reasonable success fairly early on. Who's doing what? What timetable? Who's going to be accountable? Who checks the accountability? And who's going to handle the communications? Diligent facilitating, mentoring, coaching, encouraging. We talked about that a moment ago. The campaign itself, we've got to be able to be thinking consciously about the celebration. Discipleship, church planting, transformation goals, and the church owns the vision. Now, those are the things that we, as the members of the team, have to do. And clearly, there's an overlap between the qualities of the partnership and the things we have to do. And you put all those things together, and you have an effective IWT. God will bless. God will bless. And you'll see wonderful, wonderful things happen. Now, with this, I'm going to, yes, Frank.
Just before we go on to this one,
Frank, please.
I need to shout a little hard out here. Okay. Just looking at that, and you just mentioned something about the strength of the partnerships. Are we still looking at the same kind of 80-20% ratio where 20% do 80% of the work? Or with successful partnerships, should that ratio actually change?
Really should change.
It should change.
Absolutely.
So if you do partnerships well, it should really spread much more evenly, that equal partners take equal share.
Now, by that, when I say 80-20, we change that to 50-50 or 40-60 or something. That doesn't mean that everybody in the church, in the city is engaged, but it means that the agencies or the partners are carrying a much more equal load,
Right.
or to the limit of their capacity. It's not just 2 or 3 ministries that are carrying the whole thing and the rest of them go along for the ride.
That's what I'm wondering, because quite often we have 100 churches on board, but there's really 20 who do most of it. So I'm wondering if we can increase that, you know, kind of get that up a little bit so it's less for the individuals.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. How do we actually get them engaged? How do we keep them engaged? Sometimes we do well at that. Sometimes we don't do so well at that. Sometimes that's the church's fault. It's the people's fault. Sometimes, frankly, it's our fault. We don't pay enough attention. We expect them to just, you know, once they make the commitment, to be automatically to maintain the same level of engagement and the same level of commitment. Okay, this is just a little, let's go on here. 10 famous last lines of IWT partnerships gone bad. Number 1, but I thought we had a clear understanding. Phil's top 10 list. Number 2, you mean he didn't do it? He promised. Number 3, why do people have to take all this time talking with people? Why not just call a meeting? Get it over with. Number 4, but I thought we had identified all the key leaders. Oops. Number 5, come on, can't we just speed this up a little bit? Number 6, let's just trust the Spirit. Number 7, so is anybody in charge of this part? What happened here? Number 8, let's not take all that time to talk through the issues. It'll just work itself out. It'll take care of itself. Oh, really? Number 9, what's your problem? Everybody else agrees. And number 10, it was good enough for Lauren back in the 70s. And some of you who have already been through some IWTs, I'm sure could add your own, you know, famous lost or famous last lines to that group. Okay, any final comments, observations you want to make about today's material, thoughts going through your mind? We're going to stop, I think, here. Yes.
Okay, I guess my question is, this seems like it's very intensive. I mean, it's great. Do you think that, it's really good. It just seems overwhelming when you're thinking about it. Do you think that, like, lack of money or would affect how well this goes? Like, sometimes it just feels like YWAM is like hanging on by the string sometimes, and because, you know, we raise our own funds and IWT raises its own funds, we're just like sliding by sometimes. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Do you think that is going to affect the success sometimes because of that? Like, do you think we need to up the ante a little bit? And
you know, the big question is, how about money? The fact we have raised money, we're kind of operating by the skin of our teeth, or we have these is that going to affect the success? And a very practical question. And projects which partnerships undertake, you have a vision, the big vision for the city, and there are specific projects you undertake the first 3 months or 6 months or whatever. Projects do take money, you know, it's to do things. You can't, And as I've read through the material, the IWT handbook and other things, it's a very healthy emphasis on getting the city to come up with the money. One of the interesting things about most of the partnerships, all of these major unreached people partnerships for these 90 to 100, 105 language groups, these annual regional consultations. For example, this consultation that occurs in Malta every year now for 7 days. 2 weeks ago, they had 450 people there from 60 countries around the world. It has no central budget. Nobody pays any dues. There's no membership. Everything is generated by people paying their own way, or they build into the registration fee a certain amount to cover transportation for nationals who can't get there. There's so much money that's built into the registration fee. When you have 450 people paying 125 or 200, 250 US dollars, you begin to collect quite a bit of money. So that's in addition to the hotel and meals and everything. And particularly the Westerners pay these kinds of fees. So they build a small central budget for facilitation and ongoing communication that way. But almost everything that's undertaken is undertaken by the people in the partnership. They come together, form alliances, and do things together. We'll talk more about money, but yes, money certainly can be a huge roadblock. Yeah, I don't want to get going on stories about money, but I'll tell some more as we go along. Yes, it is an important thing. Because sometimes it's equipment you need, or materials you need, or facilities you need to rent, or things you need, places you need to rent, or things that have to happen. Yeah, that's a very practical side of all of this. But I don't think the fact that YWAM, is operating on a modest budget and you have to raise your support, personally, I don't think that has anything to do. That part has absolutely nothing to do with the likely or potential success of an IWT. Nothing. Because I have not been in one single partnership or development of international network where the initiation, the initiative behind the networks was heavily funded. It was people who had somehow raised their own money, had a vision for the thing. Now I'm talking about some really serious stuff. I mean, for example, in the last 15 years, we've seen the International Refugee Highway, huge network, 150 agencies dealing with refugees all over the world. The Turkey Network, dealing with all the Turkic languages. The Arabic Internet Evangelism Network. International Sports Coalition, which is now the largest evangelistic network in the world. Nothing even comes close to it. In over 90 countries, there now are the national committees. South Africa is kind of the hotbed, for ISC. They have the kids' games and all these things that they do, this unbelievable stuff, outreach at the Olympics and all that stuff. They have no central budget at all. None. And hundreds of thousands of people are being touched every year. Now, none of these networks, right now there's a new network being launched called Global Urban Ministries. It has a lot to do with things like IWT. The great cities of the world, over 400 cities, 450 cities in and around the 1040 window, over 1 million in size. China alone has 166 cities over 1 million in size. There is no network in the world that is allowing Christian workers in these cities to talk to each other. So this new network is being launched called Global Urban Ministries. It's being launched not because there's a central budget or a lot of money available. It's being launched because a few people are committed to the vision and are willing to raise the money out of their own pocket to come to meetings, talk, pray, and work. Eventually things will happen. You know, it maybe starts a little more slowly because of that. I'm sorry to have taken so long on that, but yeah, money is a factor, but it's not the deciding factor. Other observations from today? Questions, comments? Don't want to keep you here. Yes, one more thing, okay?
Sorry. When you were talking about once we come through a city and basically needing to leave somebody behind to continue what's going on, are you thinking more in terms of like the, what's that thing called? The neighborhood center type thing, or somebody left there for a certain amount of time to help with the churches?
I don't know, honestly, Jessica. That's a thing that YWAM and IWT and Mark and you guys have to figure out how you want to do that. All I'm saying is, believers, if we come in and present a vision, we get people galvanized around this vision, and God really does something in the city. People's hearts are encouraged. They see, wow, this is really amazing. God did this amazing thing, but there's still a lot more to be done here. You know, like the little city of Edmonds, 38,000, we say, if the kingdom of God came to Edmonds 5 years from now, how would it look different? How would it look different with the children, with the judicial system, education, employment, single parents, divorce rates? What are the characteristics? If God comes in and transforms the life of the community, how does it look different? It's not just the raw numbers of people coming to Jesus. That's very important. It's a key indicator, but it's not the whole name of the game. So what are we going to do as IWT to help the church carry that vision forward? Now, if you decide we need to, in every one of the IWT cities, we need to keep somebody there for 2 or 3 years afterwards to be a kind of mentor and coach, or we develop a model as we begin to develop the community centers, we develop the NETS groups. There's a more intensive focus on structure. So we have the same kind of vision for the follow-up structure that we had for the campaign structure. You know, as IWT vision matures and develops, you know, those things. But I think increasingly, Steph and I were sitting tonight talking to some guys who are from an area where an IWT has been held in the last couple of years, and they were saying, you know, we need a lot of help here in follow-up. Great things happened in the IWT, but boy, we really have got a serious follow-up issue here. Okay, so, and they were not, they were aware of and they saw what happened, but they were not part of the IWT team itself. So, I think the implications of good partnership mean that partnership is not, just 12 months or 6 months or something. That may be if you're trying to do like an event, just an event. But this is not an event. You're trying to transform a city. Yes?
Okay. If maybe I may ask, your hopes, or else, if I may say, maybe what do you see in terms of network or churches or the body of Christ working together, especially in development countries like Africa? Maybe what you have seen for the last 5 years and the next maybe 5-10 years, what do you see there? Do you see those countries, like development countries, going forward in terms of working together, or do you think there's still a lack of network?
Well, let me speak specifically to Africa. Africa is a big, very complicated place. Tremendous number of language groups. Usually, not always, language and tribe go together, not always. Because of colonial influence and other things, sometimes you have different situation. So we know historically, because of language, tribal structures and so forth, there's been a tremendous amount of division, and still goes on. We see what's going on in Central Africa and some of these places, even what's happening now in Chad. It's partly tribal, it's partly political. Despite all of the history and the problems, I personally am tremendously encouraged, and I think this is a God thing. I'm tremendously encouraged that you have, for example, in North Africa, what you have with the NAC, and you see increasingly, like, say, Nigerian Evangelical Missions Association. NEMA has 108 indigenous Nigerian mission agencies in it. They have set an objective by 2015 to have 55,000 Nigerian missionaries in the Muslim world. Now, nobody in YWAM has any vision like that. You think you're dreaming big dreams? See, if somebody had said that about Nigeria 10 years ago, they would have laughed. Said, it's crazy. You must be nuts. They're serious. They bought 600 copies of this book. 600 copies of this book to give it to every church, evangelical mission church leader in Nigeria, because they're committed. Now, NEMA exists. Nigeria, NEMA exists in Nigeria. You have MANI, which exists. There's now every single country, from the Horn of Africa, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, down through Ethiopia, over down to Sudan, all the way down to South Africa. Every single country, no exceptions, has a national committee that's part of MANI. Now, if you'd said that was going to happen 10 years ago, people would have laughed. So even for example, ahead of some areas like India, Indian Missions Association has 230 indigenous mission societies in India. It's the largest indigenous mission association in the world. Nothing in the West even comes close to it. And that has just exploded in the last 10 years. Now, these kinds of networks and the fact they've emerged and they're now 100% in the hands of indigenous national leadership. In some cases they're doing partnerships with Western money or Western agencies, it's the global church. That's the way it ought to be. But they're now really being led. The vision is being led by Africans, by Indians, and so forth. This is tremendously encouraging. I am very hopeful for the future. So here you have Africans across linguistic lines. Sunday morning, 10 of 10, I'm sitting in my room here, was on the internet, and I had this Skype call come, and the guy who was calling me is from Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. His name is Younoussa Zhao. He was the director for Interdev of partnership work in French-speaking West Africa. Where was he calling me from? He was calling me from Pretoria, South Africa, and he turns the camera around and Skype, and sitting next to him is another guy that I know who is from Dakar, Senegal, a guy by the name of René Ambongo. So here now you have two completely different tribal background people, one from Senegal, one from Côte d'Ivoire, both French-speaking, tribal African language speakers. They're now together in Pretoria, getting ready for the MANI conference, working with English-speaking people and Portuguese-speaking people from around Africa for the redemption of. Now, 10 years ago, nobody would have even dreamed of such a thing. So, I would say I'm encouraged. Is it easy? Is it even? Is it consistent? No, it's very messy. Some things go forward and backwards, and it's a bit like this, but it's very encouraging. Good stuff.